I wanted to welcome everyone on behalf of the J by J Festival, which is a program of the Edlovich DC JCC. As you all know, because you're joining us, the festival is midway through. It continues through Sunday, May 30th. It's happening both virtually and outdoors in programs throughout the DC area, and virtually you can experience it throughout the US. To find out more, visit our website at jxjdc.org. And also on that website, you can find out more about our year-round presence. Not going to bore you with it now, other than to say that once we reopen in full in our building in September, we do have events nearly every night in the arts, particularly in cinema, but also a bit in music and conversations, somewhat similar to the one you're going to see, though I think it's going to be a very special and unique evening that you'll be glad that you joined us for. Just a quick note before we get to introducing this superstar panel that we have with us about how the program is going to work tonight. We are going to start with an extended moderated conversation moderated by Sharon Waxman, who I'll introduce in a moment. And then we will leave a little bit of time at the end for audience questions. So as you have those, you're going to ask them in one of two ways. If you're in the Zoom room, you're going to use the Q&A function. It should be on the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A. Feel free to type in your questions there. They'll be passed on to Sharon, and she'll ask them of the panelists. If you're in the Eventive room, it's a very similar concept, but the button is called Chat. Just use the chat button, and we'll get your questions over to Sharon. They're likely to be based on prior questions and just how fabulous this panel is, more questions than we're going to be able to get to. So I apologize if we're not able to get to your question before the end of the program. The conversation, as I already mentioned, I'm sure many of you recognize those on screen, is a truly star-studded lineup. We have with us Freida Mock, the Oscar-winning director of the film Ruth, Justice Ginsburg in Her Own Words, that I hope you've already had a chance to watch, and if not, you can still catch on the J by J website through May the 30th. We also have with us Marcia Greenberger. She's the co-founder of the National Women's Law Center. Lily Ledbetter, the plaintiff in the Ledbetter versus Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, and a women's equality activist and author, and Kathleen Paretis, who RGB asked to be her successor as the head of the Women's Right Division of the ACLU. I'm going to give slightly longer bios on all of them so they can really jump into the meat of the conversation. And I apologize because it's a little bit more time than we tend to give it, but as I mentioned, these are all incredibly accomplished people that well earn the accolades that I'm about to read for all of them. So I'm going to start with Marcia Greenberger. She is the founder and president emeritus of the National Women's Law Center. The creation of the center over 40 years ago established her as the first full-time women's legal rights advocate in Washington, D.C. She is a recognized expert on women and the law, particularly in the areas of education and employment, health and reproductive rights, and family economic security. Some of the notable legislative successes, which she had a key role in, are the Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1987, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, also of 1978, the Civil Rights Act of 1991, and the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, which of course you'll hear about more in a second. And even these semi-extended bios are, I promise you, much briefer than their full ones, which you can find on our website, and you should very much look into all of the contributions that these women made. I'll next move to Lily Ledbetter, who for 10 years fought to close the gap between women's and men's wages, sparring with the Supreme Court, lobbying Capitol Hill in a historic discrimination case against Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. She won a jury verdict of more than $3 million after having filed for gender pay discrimination in a lawsuit in federal court, but the US Supreme Court later overturned the lower court's ruling. Despite her defeat, Ledbetter continued her fight until the Supreme Court decision was nullified when President Obama, on January 29, 2009, signed into law the first new law of his administration, which was called the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, which you'll hear about more shortly. Then we have with us Kathleen Paretis, is a senior partner at the New York law firm Uden and Golden, representing plaintiffs in employment law matters. She has written books and many articles on issues of human rights, civil rights, women's rights, and employment law. She has participated in fact-finding missions to Russia, Bosnia, and Jordan from the Human Rights Watch, and participated in the writing and editing of the reports that resulted from those missions. She is a trustee emeritus of the Human Rights Watch, the founding chair of its Women's Rights Division, and the co-chair of the Advisory Committee on HRW's Middle East and North Africa Division. Again, much more in her bio. Check it out online. And lastly, I'd like to introduce a couple of people who probably you are somewhat familiar with as well. The first is, of course, the Academy Award and Emmy Award winning director of the film, Freida Mock. She is a director, a writer, and a producer of feature-length films as well as short documentaries. She was 5 times nominated for Academy Awards and won for Maya Lin, A Strong Vision, about the designer of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. Nominees for the award included Rose Kennedy, A Life to Remember, Sing, about one of the world's foremost children's choirs, the Los Angeles Children's Chorus, Never Give Up, about Holocaust survivor and conductor Dr. Herbert Zimmer, and To Live and Let Die, a story about medical ethics. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce and then pass over the mic to Sharon Waxman, who is very graciously moderating for us today. Sharon is the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of the Wrap News, the leading media company covering the business of Hollywood through news and live events. An Academy Award journalist and best-selling author, she founded the Wrap in 2009 and has led its rapid growth to a leading position in the entertainment business. She's also the creator of Wrap Women, a power base of influential women in media entertainment dedicated to promoting women's leadership. She's a former Hollywood correspondent for New York Times and a leading authority on entertainment business and media. I'd like to pass it off to Sharon Waxman. Again, she's going to start with a conversation at fair length with the other panelists, and then we will have time at the end for questions. Submit those questions through either the Q&A function on the bottom of your screens if you're on Zoom, or for most of you who seem to be on Eventive, use the chat function, send those over. Have a great time. I'll be in the background here and can't wait to hear the panel. Sharon, take it away.
Thank you, Ilya. So nice to be here. And thank you all for joining us. Quick correction on my bio. I did not win an Academy Award, but I don't even believe that's in my future since I don't make movies. At least I wasn't in contention and lost. I wouldn't want to go up against Freida, who I've known for many years and whose work I absolutely adore and admire. Welcome to all of you and congratulations, Freida, on this film. You can respond, Freida.
Thank you.
There you go. Thank you. I was just reminiscing with Freida that we both live in Los Angeles most of the time, and we live in the same neighborhood. And I ran into her walking down the street in the commercial village where we live, and I'm like, "What are you up to?" As one does, and she's like, "I'm working on a documentary about Ruth Bader Ginsburg." So here it is, Ruth in her own words. And sadly, at that time, we lost the great justice, but who has left an incredible legacy, including one that led to the incredible work of the other women on this panel. So that's really what I'm most curious about, is to hear about the impact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has had on all of your lives. But let's begin, Freida, with you, and let's talk about why you made this movie. I just want to say one other thing. When I think I first met Freida was when I moderated a panel about another film she made about Anita Hill. Is that right, Rita? Right?
Yes, exactly.
So,
that was it.
So Freida has a habit of picking incredible women. Well, you put it in the Napa Valley. That didn't take any kindness at all. But anyway, Freida,
yes.
Why did you choose to make this film at this time in the trajectory of your career, and why did you choose to go about telling Ruth Bader Ginsburg's story in this way?
Thanks for the question. Thank you for being here, Sharon. I was so thrilled when you said yes. So and
pleasure
particularly
for
with
you
this
always.
Incredible group. Yes. So you mentioned Anita Hill, and it turned out I had, in fact, your friend Aviva Kepner had apparently she has known Justice Ginsburg and mentioned to her back then, 5 years ago, there's a film on Anita Hill, and Justice Ginsburg said she hadn't seen the film and she'd love to see the film. So that became the basis for my relationship with Justice Ginsburg. Aviva had me, I sent the Anita to Justice Ginsburg with the film and a couple others. And that was it. I was surprised when I received a note from her, clearly from the heart, brief, and I think Kathleen can probably testify to how she's thoughtful and from the heart. Yeah, I was surprised that this is to be framed, and it was just that simple of a start of a written relationship. Okay, so it turns out I was asked to do this film. It wasn't an idea that came to me, and actually I had read Sonia Sotomayor's autobiography for this project, and I said, oh, if I'm going to do a justice story, that might be the one to do. But two executive producers, Scully and Geraldine Dreyfus, who are very, very prominent in the nonfiction world, came to me after this film on Justice Ginsburg. I had read The Nine. I didn't know too much about her. So this is in 2015. So I said, let me see if there's anything been done on her. So you go on the internet. No, there's only maybe 5-minute pieces. A lot of the books that you have out now hadn't been done on her. So I said, great idea. So I wrote Justice Ginsburg a letter, and she wrote me back. And she said, and that happened to the other film that we all know about, RBG, a wonderful film. I think we all came to Ginsburg about the same time. And she told all of us, let's wait until 2016 when a movie on the basis of sex comes out, written by her nephew. And then let's talk. Okay, 2016 round, there was no movie, but there was, the candidate on the GOP side. He won in 2017. I said to my team, I think it's time to do this film. So we just jumped in the film in 2017, and meaning research and meaning deep dive into a lot of the film come out the way you see it. As you know, there are many ways to go on a film. And the big question is, because she lived such a long, distinguished life, how much film has there been done on her? That is footage. And so the research to make what you see today entailed both, I call it intellectual research, first and secondary sources, just to kind of understand the story. And visually, the story would be this, and then visually, I think we should do this. Okay. What I found, I thought, and it's in the theme that you see from the beginning of the film. What happens, how does a person with 3 strikes against her rise to the Supreme Court? So what are the factors? I hope that the audience would ask themselves, her trajectory seems different than the recent trajectory of, let's say, Kavanaugh, whose hearings were going on in 2018 in the fall, when I was finishing the film, and I could see a very different trajectory to the Supreme Court. In her case, as you know, she worked really hard, experiences with discrimination. And so somehow in doing all my research, both and visual, that began to shape the thematic flow of the story. And since I found so much material of her, both in her 40s and her 50s and 60s and into her 80s, the idea was to use found footage, so to speak, so you could see her kind of, in one sense, change and sound differently and maybe be the same though. So I love the idea that, actually, as you know, it says in her own words. I love that idea. That became an intimate way for you, the audience, because she is, you can tell, speaks to you the way she talks to those 5th graders when you see her in her, in the Supreme Court, she's talking with you. So that shaped how the film would be visually told. And then all the people such as Kathleen Paretis and the others who are in the film all have a professional relationship. Everybody in there is not an expert. They had a professional relationship with Justice Ginsburg or as a litigator. So that I felt shaped kind of the tone of the story. Mm-hmm. So that both the research, visual and deep reading books and such shaped, what story I would emphasize. And I love hearing from Kathleen. Saw the film last year, and she was so it's like it's so incredible. Actually, I have it. I won't read it. Okay, but she said that she knows Justice Ginsburg so well, and wrote saying that she'd never seen footage like of her that we had found.
That's so
great. So
great.
much about the law and also about her character. So I was like, I said, this is a sandwich. I was going to put it on, anyway.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how the film developed. Okay. I do want to say something about the animation, which a lot of people say. Yeah. So that you I think it was very important to understand that she probably, it was the work she did in the 70s that made her stand out from many of the other brilliant potential candidates for this premiere. And as you know, she was not on the short list. But as Kathleen says in the film, her husband is a campaign manager, and he made sure she got on the short list. And I think it was the 6 Supreme Court cases that she argued made an absolute turning point in her standout among all the wonderful candidates. And it's really the work she did on Jen.
Let me.
And that's why we had to do those. Yes.
Yeah. I'm just going to flag. I'm having a little trouble hearing you a little bit, Freida. I don't know if there's an internet connection issue, but we heard most of that. So just want to flag that. If I don't know if there's anything we can do about it. Kathleen, so you were in the film and you were very close, apparently, I learned through watching the film, with Justice Ginsburg, and in fact took the mantle of the ACLU from her. Is that correct? Right. So tell us what that meant to you at that time, and talk a little bit about your relationship with Justice Ginsburg, and which is much more personal than those of us who just saw her from the outside could appreciate.
If I could begin by just saying how when Freida asked me to participate, or when Freida asked Ruth to cooperate with making the film, people had already been asking her for cooperation on books and on at least that documentary and another one after that. Ruth would usually tell the people who were close to her, this one's doing a film, this one's doing a book, cooperate with this one, don't cooperate with that one. She often said, don't talk to this one or that one. And sometimes she then changed her mind, and I didn't know it. So she was cooperating and I wasn't. So because I hadn't gotten the memo, sometimes there was a little bit of a lag. But as soon as Freida asked her, she said yes right away and told me right away, cooperate with Freida. That's how much regard she had for the quality of Freida's work.
Absolutely.
And the film certainly shows it. As Freida mentioned, there was stuff in that film that I had never seen before, and some themes and ideas that Freida developed in a way that was that was unique and very penetrating.
Well, I'm so curious. We've all seen, I think, some of the footage of her, testimony in Congress when she was getting confirmed for various roles. But what was the footage that you had not seen before that's in the film?
Some of the stuff in classrooms with children.
Yeah.
I think that that Freida brought out a tenderness, a tender side of Ruth, which was very present, but doesn't necessarily show through in books and movies. But Freida really teased that out, and I thought in a very beautiful way. So I like that a lot. But I want to say that if you've watched this movie once, I very strongly recommend that you watch it twice, because I watched it last year and I watched it again yesterday, and I saw things that I just didn't see the first time. And let me tell you one thing that is kind of shocking. There are a lot of sex abusers in this film. We didn't know it at the time.
Yes.
But Tubin and Domingo
I
and
noticed.
Anthony Weiner doesn't have a speaking
I noticed.
But how the worm has turned in just the 2 years since you were assembling all that footage. So it's kind of a testament to her success. But I'm watching it and thinking, holy smoke, what are those guys doing there?
Yeah,
so
you couldn't really cut them out.
No, and another thing, other than the tenderness, I think an aspect that Freida brought out is a lot of Ruth's physicality. In a couple of in 2 or 3 scenes, Ruth is talking about her size and the fact that her size was sometimes thought to be an impediment, but she used it. She pointed to the painting in the moot court classroom that was dedicated to her and said, this gets it right because it doesn't show me as a big person, I'm a little person. So I like the fact that you drew out a lot of Ruth's physicality, and that was very sweet. And I've got other comments too, but I won't hog the camera.
Well, no, we'll circle back around to you, but it is interesting that, it is a certain kind of challenge as a filmmaker to take somebody who's become an icon in, say, the past decade, and figure out how I have a Ruth Bader Ginsburg bobblehead doll in my office. I've got a hat now. And like, these things were not even available except in the past couple of years, but now everybody has like the t-shirt or whatever it might be. So, it is important to remember that she was just a person, honestly. Oh, there you go. You've got the mug. So, no, I realized I didn't bring my bobblehead. Marcia, talk a little bit about what was the impact of her work on your work as the founder of the National Women's Law Center.
Well, I'm going to try to be very brief because in summary,
we got time. Go ahead.
In summary, she made my entire career. I graduated from law school in 1970, so a bit after she, but still there were very few women in my law school class. And I went to a law firm that was in Washington that was specialized in tax law. And that was not what I wanted to do, but I thought tax policy was interesting. And I was the first woman associate in that firm. And there were not very many women lawyers in Washington at the time. There was a new public interest law firm called the Center for Law and Social Policy that was working on environmental issues and consumer protection issues and health law issues and that sort of thing. All male lawyers. The women who were the administrative support staff and some of the law students who were starting to come up in the law had a revolt. And among their demands, and this was in 1972, based on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, was that the center start a women's rights project and hire some women lawyers. And your audience in Washington may know Arthur Goldberg, who was a quite renowned Supreme Court justice, among other things. And he was at my firm and he told me about this. And I just by then, having been told by a number of Washington, D.C. firms they would never hire women lawyers, period, the end, they just wouldn't.
I was going to say that no reason given, just.
Oh, well, the reasons were varied. One reason was, did you know Washington is not a safe city? And did you know that their young women, their young associate lawyers work very late at night? They cannot have a young woman lawyer working late at night.
Wow.
What if something happened to her?
Oh my goodness.
They would never forgive themselves, so they can't. It's obvious.
They also said we don't hire women.
Yeah,
Just
they
flat-
wouldn't
just
hire
flat
them.
out.
Yeah. There were many judges at the time who said we would not hire a woman as a law clerk, which is something, and said it out loud. And there
doesn't even, sounds illegal when you say it out loud.
But
It was illegal.
It was illegal, yeah.
Something else.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg with her litigation, and it took a companion effort to get laws passed that prohibited sex discrimination in education, which was not illegal until 1972. Professional sex discrimination in employment was not illegal until 1972, etc. There were one-ads in major newspapers, including the New York Times.
So what would
that
you
had
say?
Jobs for women. Jobs for men.
What would you say was the most important case that Ruth Bader Ginsburg argued successfully before the Supreme Court that made an impact on, say, these things that you're talking about right now?
Well, the very first case that she argued in 1971, which was the beginning of a number of her cases,
50 years ago.
which established and for the very first time struck down a state law that discriminated on the basis of sex. Before that, the Supreme Court had upheld every kind of discrimination on the basis of sex. And that she pushed that door open, and then through brilliant other cases after that, she developed it. I want to make one other very quick point about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and my own personal career. Well, when I started in 1972, with some trepidation, I called her for advice about what would be good areas for me to be working in.
Wait a
what should I
minute.
do.
How did you know her? Because you did like you don't
Well,
just call Supreme. Here in
I-
California, we don't just pick up the phone and call
You
Supreme Court
don't.
justices.
And as I
No.
did say myself, I called with some trepidation. But I was also the first woman lawyer in Washington, D.C., working full-time on women's rights.
Okay.
And I didn't want to screw it up. So I called her up and I explained who I was. And I asked if she would be willing to give me some advice.
You didn't know her. You just
I
called
did
her.
not know her at that point.
Okay.
She was open. She was giving. She was totally available to give advice. I had since worked with her on legislation, including establishing that pregnancy discrimination was sex discrimination and illegal. And she had a major role in passing that legislation and being very much involved in the strategy and the drafting of the law and all of the things to make sure that it would be done properly. And so she was somebody who I worked with, and I didn't work in as close a way, if I had been in New York, but I worked with her and called her for advice and worked with her about cases and legislation that we were working on. And I will also say that not only did she establish constitutional protection for the first time, that the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution protected women, but she really developed the field of women's rights. And if she didn't have an upfront role, she had a behind the scenes role that I'm describing for those of us who did a lot of the legislative work, where she was available to give advice. And in this pregnancy discrimination case, where the Supreme Court held, oh, well, did you know that discriminating on the basis of sex, which by then was illegal, that didn't mean discriminating on the basis of pregnancy was illegal, because pregnancy discrimination isn't sex discrimination.
Right.
Obviously.
Obviously.
Well, obviously, any woman didn't think it was so obvious. At that point, there were no women on the Supreme Court. Fortunately, Congress did not seem to think it was so obvious either. And she came down and really had a major role, as I said, in working on that legislation. And I saw from her savviness in dealing with press and getting public attention and understanding what it took to get public support behind something and use the law to change the culture and the mindset, that she used a lot of those techniques in the Lilly Ledbetter case when she dissented. She wrote a brilliant dissent, of course, but I was sitting in the courtroom when that opinion was read and her dissent was read. And often justices may write a dissent, but they don't read their dissent out loud. Why does that matter? Because they're press sitting in the courtroom taking notes on what happens. And many people did not understand how important Lilly's case was, many of the press. And when she read her dissent from the bench, for the first time, the press got it. They wrote about it. It became a cause célèbre. It became a political issue in the presidential election with both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, who were running first in the primary, and then, of course, Barack Obama for president, using the Lilly Ledbetter case as one of the major cases that he was campaigning on of how he would rule differently. It wasn't a surprise that that was the first new law that he signed. And she brought it to life, and she knew from her public women's rights practice all the strategies that you have to bring to bear to change the law, arguing brilliantly, but being very strategic and changing public opinion and using the press, etc. And she was a fabulous strategist. And I'll say the last thing, she was a kind and decent person. And that comes through in the movie. As Kathleen said, when she lights up with those students, but also she was never somebody who said, oh, I'm the woman. I don't want to talk to any other women. I'm doing it all. She never said, oh, I can be the one woman on the Supreme Court who needs more. She never said, oh, well, I'm the Women's Rights Project of the ACLU. Who cares about you in Washington? She was a generous, kind person, and she was a wonderful human being. I've had conversations with her about her favorite pocketbook that she likes and why, and where we've gone for this thing or that thing. And she's a very engaging and was a human being who really could relate to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, she was reserved. And many people didn't understand because she wasn't Ms. Gabby, always talking, that she had such a strong human element about her. And I think that made her quite successful through all of her professional career, her human qualities. And she established the whole field of women's rights.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to you, Lily. For those of us who know your story, it's such an honor to have you here. And I would want to personally say thank you to you from one woman to another for the courage that you showed and that what you went through on behalf of all women who put in as much work that deserves to be valued in the same way as men. I finally started my own company, so I don't have to worry about that.
Right.
One of the reasons I started my own company, so I wouldn't have to worry about that.
Right.
So we all owe you a great debt of gratitude. And please tell us sort of how experiencing, well, let's just go straight to the part that connects to Justice Ginsburg. When you sat in that courtroom and you heard her read this dissent that Marcia is just referring to, what was your reaction?
Well, I hate to say, but I wasn't in the courtroom when the verdict came out. Evidently, we had not been notified, or if we had, my attorney was on vacation. So I didn't know when it was being read.
Oh, what a shame.
But Linda Greenhouse, a reporter, called me personally after that verdict was read and her dissent was read. She said, if I could have only heard it, I would have never minded losing, because she said, Justice Ginsburg, loud and clear, cut to the chase. And she said, these fellows do not know what it's like in the real world. And she said, even if you're being discriminated against or getting short pay, it might not be discrimination. But I had the opportunity in 2010, Marcia Greenberger, who you just talked, she got me after a visit I had in the Congress, and I was in DC, got me down to meet Justice Ginsburg in person. And that dissent changed my life. I mean, it just changed my life. And of course, growing up and working through the years as a young woman and later, I never intended to have my name on a legal case that would go all the way to the Supreme Court.
That's right.
And I certainly never expected to have a bill with my name on it. But it is quite an honor. Even though I did not get that $3.8 million, I never got a dime. But it's been
you never got any money. You never got any satisfaction.
I never got a dime. I never got a dime. But I'll try to get this down to the testimony 5 minutes, like I got in the Senate and the House. But it ended up that when that verdict came out, the outcry across the country was just unreal. I mean, and my attorney said, don't worry about the media, we'll handle it. Well, I thought about it. I wasn't embarrassed. I had a good case. The law was on my side. That case should have gone on through based on the interpretations in the previous cases. So when NBC called, I invited them in. CNN called, I invited them in. Every newspaper started calling. I picked up the phone and I spoke with them. And we got as much press as we possibly could. And that made the episode across the country with the legal people, the women, the men. The men understand if their wives are not being paid properly. And it was like a lot of the young men in Congress told me when I went by lobbying for the bill. They said, look, my mother used to work 2 jobs to send me to law school.
Yeah.
They understood, they get it. But this was so critical. And once that verdict came out, it was no longer about Lily Ledbetter and my family, because it was about all of the people across the nation still working and the young people and their families. And it was critical. And Justice Ginsburg challenged Congress. She said, the ball is in your court. And so they listened. They listened loud and clear. And within just a few weeks, I was back in DC with my attorney. We were in the Congress testifying before the House. I testified twice before the House, twice in the Senate, and walked the halls. And I don't know how many lobbying places we went across the nation getting the bill passed. But I filed my charge in 1998.
When you got to meet Justice Ginsburg, what did she say to you?
Well, we embraced, and I told her how sorry I was about her losing her husband, and shared with her that I had just lost mine, and she didn't know it. So we each kind of teared up a little bit, and then she backed up and she said, you know, the first 3 jobs I had as a lawyer, they told me up front, we will not pay you what we pay our male attorneys, because one said because she had a husband, one other one said she didn't have a family, and that was 3 occurrences that she did not get equal pay to her peers because she said simply because I was a woman, I was a female attorney, and she shared that story, and she spoke very definite from the heart, and I had a good few minutes with her, and a couple of photos were made, but she knew exactly. And she was so proud of her copy of the bill and the pen that was framed on her wall, because President Obama personally brought it to her. But she felt like she was a part of that. She really was. And she was so sincere. And then mine and her picture would show up on the front of a lot of magazines around the country, or they'd be they also showed up in the Japanese newspaper. All I could read was her name and President Obama and Lily Ledbetter, and they sent me a whole copy of it. And on my wall up here, I have a copy of the Italian paper, because the Italians invited me to Rome, Italy.
You should go. You should definitely go. Okay.
I did. I stayed 6 days. I stayed 6 days. I have a statue over here in the corner, but it's, I mean, I didn't get any money, but I sure have a lot of good memories. And
you made,
things.
Lily, you made history, and you were forever in our history books.
One thing I do want the people that's participating and hearing us today to know, you're exactly right. This bill, the Lily Ledbetter bill, changed a lot for a lot of people around the world and across this nation, because my ruling had closed the courtroom doors, and the bill opened it back up. And it was really a wonderful thing to say that bill was supported by Democrats and Republicans and voted into being the law by both parties. And we, Marcia and a lot of other people across the nation, got that bill passed in 18 months. It wasn't easy, but we did.
You did. I mean, there's so many lessons to learn from Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life, because she had such a long career, and she did so many remarkable things at all stages of her career. I mean, I like the fact that she was a kind and compassionate person, but in some ways it'd be like she could have been, a totally different personality. It's so interesting that she was
Right.
this reserved person and very strategic in the way she went about doing things. But
True.
when you look at like what she accomplished over that long course of her career, it is such a great lesson to all of us. Like the things you can get done all the way
Yes.
through your life, it's a lesson in persistence, or, is it the slow and steady wins the race, or you just, because in your case, Lily, it was a loss, right? It was a
Right.
loss, and it was her evoking, not giving up, not walking away, but actually saying, I'm 8-1 here, and you 8 are wrong.
Right. Right.
And that actually over time, it's the same thing, by the way, Freida, we've talked about this with Anita Hill, because I've spoken, Anita Hill is another person who I revere. And I
Right.
say, how could you lost, right? Clarence Thomas got on the court. People didn't believe you. How did you move forward? And when you take a loss, it's such a great lesson that you move forward anyway. To have people of this, women like this for us to look up to, I think is just incredibly inspiring. That's my speech, and I'm done now. Let's talk about sort of where, the legacy that's on the court, because there are now 3 women on the court, but one, of course,
Right.
quite conservative, scarily conservative to those of us who cherish things like Roe v. Wade. Is there any, if there's any knock you might have on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, might it be that she stayed on the court till the end?
No, she should have been respected enough that last election should have been made when the new president was elected. They should have recognized her status. But there, again, in her life, they just did not respect her. It was a slam in her face. But one thing I failed to finish on my statement a while ago about the pictures and articles, she would send those to me. And my attorney said, forget whatever she's sending, save those envelopes. I never knew anyone to get correspondence from the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court right now, the 3 women we have, I had the opportunity to testify on behalf of Elena Kagan. And I researched her, and I know exactly she was well qualified, and she was my selection. And I went to DC, and back Marcia Greenberger was sitting in the back of the room when I testified on behalf of Elena Kagan. I've met Sotomayor, which I can't say her name.
Sotomayor.
I met her, yes, like in the last inauguration for the Hall of Fame in Seneca Falls, New York. And Marcia and I both we were both in the Hall of Fame. But I met Sonia there. And she was just as warm and pleasant, and she cares about the law. And she's got to where now she does speak out. A lot of the reporters pick up her statements and her feelings and some of her writings. And she is just following, to me, in Justice Ginsburg's footsteps. She's standing up and more vocal than any of the others have been.
Let me ask the others about if you have an opinion about Roe v. Wade and where we might end up, because that certainly is going to come before the court.
Yes.
I'd like to pick up on a couple of the themes that Lily laid down, because I think you raised some very important threads that led to Ruth becoming the notorious RBG. First of all, Lily, I want to say that one of the reasons that you've been such a star is you have the great fortune of having a fantastic name and a great face. So I think that those have been extremely important in the arc of the fame, and you carried this bill forward in a fantastic way, because you're
my new best friend.
But I wanted to say that you noted that this was a dissent in your case, and Ruth really didn't like to dissent. For many years, she's a collaborative person, and she wanted to influence a majority decision, and being in dissent was not something that she cherished. She did it in your case, and it was really one of the moments when she started to realize that collaboration was not going to work anymore. The court had changed, the dynamic, the politics had changed, and your case was a very important moment in that transformation. And even more important, you mentioned that Marty died. You talked about your husband having passed and Marty having passed. When Marty died, he was Ruth's great fan and great supporter and voluble and funny and outgoing. And Marty was actually the diva. When Marty passed, the diva role became available. And I think that Ruth had the opportunity to step into that role and might not have otherwise. So I think the passing of your husband and hers was extremely important to her evolution. And you raised those themes, and I think both of them are really important. So stepping out worked, dissenting worked, taking a role on a big stage worked, and all of those things in the last 10 years of her life, I think gave her the most important role of her career, which is this gigantic influence on women and girls all over the world. Her jurisprudence was so important, so transformational, one of those layers, inspiring, and
Yeah, I think we're having a bit of a connection thing. Kathleen,
I'd like to say something very
Yes,
quickly
Marcia, please.
I love it.
about Roe v. Wade and your question.
Yes, please.
There's a huge amount of concern about why the court took this case.
Yes.
There wasn't any disagreement of the lower courts that needed to be straightened out.
You're talking about a case that's coming shortly before the court.
It's coming to the Supreme Court now. And it's a very, very severe restriction, a ban on women's being able to get abortions that would never be allowed under Roe v. Wade. And that's what all the lower courts have been saying about similar types of bans. So the fact that there were at least 4 justices who wanted to take it has caused huge amount of worry and concern, and I think with very good reason. And it might be worth remembering 2 different things. There's a section I thought that was really superb in the movie about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's view of abortion rights and how central that was to women's autonomy and their ability to control their futures. But when Ruth Bader Ginsburg first joined the bench, she generally did not read her dissents out loud if she had written them.
Right.
And that was not a usual thing, as I said, for justices to do anyway. The time when she read the Lilly Ledbetter dissent out, and actually if called on Congress to fix it, because it was a statute that Congress could pass and get it right. And that's what the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act was. But she also read a dissent on abortion. And the court had narrowed women's protection to have access to the right to choose and to get abortion care. And she felt very strongly that that was another pillar of women's equality and dignity. And that it was that same time when there was a lot of comment by the press and others that she felt so strongly that she read both of those opinion dissents out loud. And I have no doubt that this would not be a happy development from her perspective.
Right. Well, we'll have to see where that goes. Pendulum swings, I guess, one way and then the other, perhaps. We do have a whole bunch of good questions from our viewers, so I'm going to throw a couple of them out there. This one is from Betty Swank, and to anybody on the panel, what do you make of the friendship between RBG and Anthony Scalia? Is that a relic of the past, or do you expect politicians and those in the judicial field still have the ability to be friends with their ideological opposites? Good question.
I think that there are friendships across ideological chasms. This one was historic. They hardly agreed on anything, but he really made her laugh. He was hilarious. So that was a very important a part of their friendship. And of course, they both loved opera, but they had a reverence for law. They had a reverence for good writing. They were the two best writers on the court, and I think they love to read each other's writings and just not agree upon a single thing in those beautifully crafted sentences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Here's a question for you, Freida. How did you choose the legal cases that you highlighted in the film? There were so many to pick from.
Well, it was actually simple because I focused on the 6 Supreme Court cases that she argued before the Supreme Court, even though she worked probably on what 300 plus cases that go through the Women's Rights Project. But those 6, and of those 6, I don't have to give all 6. So we decided to do 4 out of the 6. You know, you can go on the others, but they each, the ones we chose, express a certain different each a slightly different idea. But I would think it's very important to actually do those Supreme Court cases that were well, in fact, the ones she argued.
And she lost one of them.
Yes. Yeah.
Remind us which one, Kathleen?
So
it was called Kahn versus Shevin, and it was her second Supreme Court case. So it's not as if she won 5 and then lost 1. She won 1 and then lost 1. And I don't recall her being at all worried about the strategy. She took the loss and just kept on going. And that to me was a great lesson in, I don't know, fortitude, strength, confidence. When you think about it, that was a real kick in the head. Now she's 1 for 2, but she persisted with the strategy and had confidence in it, and it worked.
Was it another thing having to do with gender equity, the substance of the case?
It was a case that the ACLU didn't even know about until the Supreme Court granted cert, decided they were going to grant review. It had been started by an ACLU affiliate in Florida, and the system wasn't very tight then, so we didn't even know what was happening. It was a widower who wanted to get a small property tax exemption that was available to widows, but not to widowers. For a lot of reasons, it made no sense. And Ruth knew it made no sense. But by the time we learned about it, it was too late to stop it.
It was ironic that it was a tax case. But tax cases in general, although Ruth did win a tax case working with her husband, Marty, but this, at the time when it was decided, one of the things that people used to try to distinguish the loss was the fact that it's very difficult to have tax cases with a particular provision struck down because Congress didn't give a tax benefit to everybody. And the fact that they gave it to women when they didn't give it to men,
right,
was seen by some of the justices as an acceptable form of affirmative action for women because they were economically so disadvantaged.
Right.
And that, of course, was language you would have never heard if it weren't for Ruth Ginsburg. So it was a loss, but it was able to be overcome for all the reasons that Kathleen said, and it was a quirky case as well.
Let me ask you before we run out of time, because I know time they're going to make me wrap up at some point. Do you think do you have an opinion, or do you know what Justice Ginsburg thought about the notion of expanding the size of the Supreme Court? Did that come up in any conversations that those of you who knew her personally ever had with her? I think we lost Kathleen, but she'll come back.
I'd never read anything about that. So
Well, she's,
I wouldn't
yeah,
know. Yes.
I mean, her passing
she
is,
didn't know.
is probably one of the main reasons that we're even talking about the issue at the moment, because if she was still on the
Yeah.
court, or if we had waited for the election to replace her on the court, it probably would be more of a moot point. Well, I was just curious about that. And one of the things I loved, one of the questions that you found of Justice Ginsburg was when she was asked how many women the court should have. Freida, do you want to share that
Yes,
bit?
she said not 9, of course. I've had
Right.
9 men until, on the court, all 9 being men. So of course, my attitude was great, And I would like to say just one last thing about the issue which all of us can learn from in terms of using our platforms, because even though she reserved and maybe in the background, but in fact, I found her aware of her platform just by looking at all the material of out. We the team realized after looking at all this footage that we could tell 8 out of 10 times she will talk about certain issues, because she could only had so much time to meet the public and the 100 people or so. So she was very aware, both as you described, this idea of having a bench dissent, that when you talked of a dissent from the bench, people were listening. And that's the case, the Voting Rights Act in 2013. She did this incredible comment about, no way, the Voting Rights Act is like throwing away an umbrella when it's not raining. And we can all umbrella idea. And the couple of things before I talk about strategy, but she learned how to be strict about her words from her teacher at Cornell. Her English teacher was Nabokov, Vladimir Nabokov. I said, wow. And she said he taught her how to write and the musicality of language and words. So she, that she's very strategic about her writing, but also about her public speaking. And so as an example, I found that she's the only public speaker, a national leader, who would speak about 2 informations. One was unconscious bias, which is in the film, and the other was the Japanese American internment or concentration camp experience during World War II. I've never heard a national leader at these times do that. And she used her platform knowing that it would have that people are listening. And so I think we, who have whatever platforms, all of you, that it's something we can learn from from her success. So,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, that's a great note to wrap up our discussion. Thank you so much, Lily Ledbetter, Marcia Greenberger, Kathleen Peralta, and Freida Mock. Congratulations again on your film. What a fantastic tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one that we can watch and rewatch. And thank you to all of you for joining us and for your questions, and have a great rest of festival.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
And thank you.
Thank you.
You're wonderful.
Bye for